Hi guys. So today we're going to talk a bit more about strings. We're starting a new chapter, chapter 8. So we're going to skip around a little bit. If you look at the syllabus, we're going to talk about strings before we talk about lists and tuples and things. Strings are really useful. You're going to do a lot of programs that use strings, and Python has a lot of really nice tools for dealing with strings. If you've used other programming languages, you'll quickly notice that the Python tools for strings are much better than the strings that you've used to in some of the other languages. So we've talked about strings basically. Um, we used a lot of strings. So remember, a string is just a series of characters like Chuck, and we put it in quotation marks, and that thing is a string. So we can also have variables that are string, for example. And so I know some people have complained about the size of the font in PyCharm, and so I've discovered that PyCharm has this really nice thing called presenter mode, which is what you're looking at right now, and like the whole screen is just the editor window. So you're not going to see the compile window and things like that. You're just going to see the editor window. But I think it makes it much easier for you to see what's running. All right, so we can have a string variable, like I can say name equals Chuck, and so now the name variable is a string variable. So we can have string constants, string literals, which is the string Chuck. You see this word Chuck here. This is a string literal, and then this is a string variable. Okay, so we can also make another variable, and we can set equal to name. We can do things like this. We can do assignments with strings, but you need to keep in mind the difference between a string literal or a string variable. Most of the stuff we're going to talk about today will apply to either one of these. So we're going to talk about basic string operations, which is what we're just going to talk about in this video. Then later we're going to talk about string slicing, testing, searching, and manipulating strings. But today we're just going to talk about basic string operations. All right, so there's many types of programs that do operations on strings, things like web browsers. There are just many examples of this. And there are a lot of tools in Python for doing things with strings. So strings are just sequences of characters, right? So a string, like the name Chuck, is just CHUCK. It's just a sequence of characters. So there are a lot of things that you can do with sequences that we've already looked at, for example, loops and things that you can use strings for if you want to do use strings instead of, for example, generating a series of numbers. For example, we can use a for loop. We can say for character in string, and this will let us loop over a string. For example, I can say for character in name colon, oops, that was supposed to be a colon, print, oops, character. All right, and then when I run this, when I run this, oh, there's an indentation mistake. Oops. Yeah, let's not do these indentation errors here. All right. So yeah, be careful with your spaces. All right, and you see that what it does is it prints out C and then H and then U and then C and then K. And so what this for loop is doing is it's looping over this string, and I'm just printing out every character individually. So we can use these things in for loops, and we can actually you can use things like this, or I could actually put string literal in there, and that is also fine. So we can substitute the string variables and string literals in a lot of different places. We can also use indexing. So each character has an index specifying its position in the string starting at 0. For example, let's say I want to print name bracket 2. So name bracket 2 will be, let's remove this, and then we can run this, and you will see what happens. So we print the U. So the first one is the 0th one. Remember, in Python, the first element of things is always the 0th element, and then the second element, and then the third element. So element 2 is actually the third element in the string because we count from 0 to n minus 1, right? So we can individually specify each character in the string. Very simple to do. So here's some examples. We have a loop. they're giving a loop. Basically, it's the same loop I just showed you. For the first iteration, it prints out the J. For the second iteration, it prints out the U. And they're basically just looping over the characters in the name. Pretty straightforward. Take a look at the slide if this isn't clear to you. String indexes work just like this. So the 0th character is the first one, and then we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The spaces count as a character, right? And then the very last one is the n minus first, right? Because we go from 0 to n minus 1. So we have a string. The character in a specific position is you can use indexing. Again, if you want to look at the indexing again, we just use these square brackets to specify which character in the string you want to look at. If we want to look at the first one, we can specify the first one. If we run this, you'll see it prints the H. All right. So if you try to use an index that's outside the range of the string, for example, in our code that can't happen because we're looping over the string itself. But let's say you wanted to use a for loop and you wanted to use numbers and you loop from 1 to 10 and there are only 5 characters in the string. You're going to get an error called an exception. So an exception is an error at runtime in Python, and we'll talk about how you can catch exceptions. We call it catching exceptions, which means when it occurs, you can grab it and say, okay, I'm going to print an error out about this, and I'm either going to continue or I'm going to take some other action. Or I'm just going to exit the program. We'll talk about exceptions later. Don't worry about it now, but it will basically throw an error if we try to use a index that's out of the string. So let's see what that looks like. Let's say I want to print name 10, and I run this. You see, I'm going to get an error here. String index out of range. That means that I've tried. There's only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 characters in my name. I tried to print the 10th one. It doesn't exist. You can get some subtle ones. For example, print name 5. You would think that this would run, right? But in fact, remember we start from 0 to 4, and 5th element is non-existent because that's actually the 6th element in the string because we start from 0 with the indexing. We can also use the len function to tell us how long a string is. This is useful if you're going to try to loop over each individual element of the string, although there's no real reason to do that. Unless you're a Java programmer and you're used to trying to do stuff like this, you don't really have to do that in Python. You can just loop over the string itself. So anytime you're using len, unless you're have a specific need for the length, if you're using len and you're using it in a loop, you're probably doing something wrong because that's probably not the way you should do it. You don't need the length of the string. You really can just loop over the characters. Alright, so that's it for this video. Next time we'll talk about string concatenation and some other string operations. Hope you enjoyed it, and I hope that the code is much more visible. If you're having issues viewing the code, remember to set your, by default YouTube will play back the video in 480p, which will make it not very visible. Go ahead and switch that to 1080p and go ahead and run everything in full screen, and you should be able to see the video because it looks like the font is huge on my screen. I mean, I have a big monitor, but I still think it should be easily viewable. So good luck, and if you have any other issues, you send me an email and let me know.